statements expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of WWDB, its staff, or management.
The opinions expressed by the guests of this show do not necessarily express the opinions of Dr. Weinerman or Weinerman Pain and Wellness.
Help! I need somebody. Help! Not just anybody. Help! You know I need someone.
Welcome to the Pain and Wellness Hour, sponsored by Weinerman Pain and Wellness, Philadelphia's premier physical therapy and pain management facility. Here are your hosts, Blake Rosen and Dr. Albert Talone.
All right, welcome to the Pain and Wellness Hour. This is Joe Doherty. I'm sitting in the big chair for Joe Kraus, who's on assignment today. We got a great show. Today's our Philly Labor Presents Brandon Swartz and Friends show, and we're going to have obviously Brandon here and his guest David Zealous of Zealous Law, and I'm accompanied by Marla Vitarello of Weinerman Pain and Wellness. I want to welcome everybody to the broadcast.
Yes, thank you, Joe.
Hello.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have everybody. Certainly. I want to start off, obviously, Brandon, you've been on the show several times. You almost need no introduction. Swartz Culleton is a major firm throughout the Delaware Valley, but this is a unique experience because this show is dedicated to you and your practice, and also to guests. And when we kind of laid the show out, and we're featuring, the top legal representatives throughout the Delaware Valley, you're able to bring on to the show really almost any guest you want. And talk to us a little bit about what led you to David, other than you owe him money from a Super Bowl bet that you lost.
Yeah, so today was my pleasure to invite my friend and colleague David Zealous onto the show. I thought that it would bring us somewhat of a unique perspective onto the show, because anytime I've always been in the past, we're always talking about one aspect of personal injury or another. But as we know, people across the city of Philadelphia, they could require an attorney for any one of a number of reasons. And my friend David is one of the most prominent criminal defense attorneys in the area, so that's why I asked him to come on the show. Joe, just so you know a little bit of background about David. David was the chief prosecuting attorney for Bucks County, the district attorney's office, for years. He was the district attorney who prosecuted the Mary Jane Fonder case, which was covered by the national news media. That was the lady who became infatuated with the church pastor and ultimately was convicted of murder when David prosecuted the case. Ultimately, as we would see it, David saw the light and switched over to the defense attorney side.
Sure.
We always say in our practice, my partner Chris Culleton and I, that in terms of where we're philosophically aligned, what we do in personal injury is almost directly philosophically aligned with where criminal defense would be in that case. We're representing the same sort of people. We want the same sort of people to get the same protections that we have. So we always feel that we're philosophically aligned. So we thought it made perfect sense to bring David on and have him explain to the audience about his practice and really answer questions that they might be wondering the answer to should they know somebody that's currently going through the system right now that needs help, or what they should do in the future if they came unfortunate enough to have to go through the system themselves,
or a family member.
Sure.
First of all, Brandon, I'm appreciative, obviously, that you brought David, and you know what, I'm interested. I mean, I couldn't wait to get here because, we do talk a lot about injury law here, and there's a ton of people out there that are victims of that type of system, and they've injury victims and injured workers, and certainly we cover the gamut there. But I really am looking forward to having this conversation because it does introduce a different part of the law, but one that's incredibly intriguing. So, without further ado, David. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and the firm.
Well, I appreciate Brandon's kind words, and if I were getting a phone number
I would have 1-800-JUSTICE, but he already stole that number, and that's how we're philosophically aligned.
Let me tell you what I know about Brandon. You got to get up pretty early in the morning to be, you know what I mean?
Yes, of course. But that's where the philosophical alignment is, and my whole career I look at it as being the pursuit of justice. When I got out of law school, my first job was in the Bucks County District Attorney's Office. I worked my way up so that I was second in charge of the office. I was there for 26 years, and 10 of those years I was second in command of the whole office. I prosecuted high-profile cases. A lot of these cases still are on Discovery Channel. People come up to me on the street and they'll say, "I just saw you last night on TV." I'm like, "What? How? What?"
Right.
And they'll say, "Well, Discovery Channel ran the Mary Jane Fonda case, which is known as the Church Lady murder case, or some of the other cases that I prosecuted when I was in the district attorney's office." So I had a great run as a prosecutor. I loved every minute of it. As my wife said to me after I left the DA's office, she couldn't understand, how could you put people in jail, and then the next thing you know, you're arguing for them to get out. I said, there's no difference, because
you're fighting for justice.
That's right. The people come to my office now as a defense attorney, they're all innocent. And if you think about the way the Constitution is set up, they're innocent until proven guilty.
That's right.
My job is to protect their interests and also to make sure or ensure that justice is done. And that means putting the police and the prosecutors to task as to, was everything done legally and within the constitutional principles.
Now, the benefit of having been a prosecutor and a successful one for so many years has to give you not only the experience that is unprecedented, but also a perspective and a knowledge about what the other side's going through.
Absolutely. I have a real good insight as to how to drive a prosecutor crazy.
Yeah. Well,
and believe me, I use that to my advantage all the time.
Well, it's interesting because when I had a conversation with Brandon, and one of the interesting things, we've had a lot of really compelling conversations here, and I said to Brandon one time, I said, "How do you know when something's a case?" And he said, "Well, and that's a big, obviously that's got to be a big deal, in your area as well." But Brandon said, I might vet the client and be tough on him because I want to make sure that, obviously, how about you say it?
Yeah, what I said to every once in a while, not once in a while, in fact, quite often a client will call and they'll sort of get frustrated by our line of questions. And what I explain to them is, if you can withstand my cross-examination, then I know you're going to win the case. If you can't withstand my cross-examination, then we're not interested in the case. So what you use the term vetting, that's essentially what we're doing. We're vetting the credibility of the client. We're vetting the likelihood of winning. And then we make our determination as to whether or not we can be successful on the case. I'm sure David very much does the same thing in his practice, that he sort of can recreate the cross-examination that his client could otherwise expect to have. He can recreate what the prosecution is going to do, and he has the inside track on knowing what the prosecutor is thinking.
Whether you're defending or you're going to plead, right? All right, buddy,
I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
So give me an example of a case that kind of came across your path for each of you that you absolutely had to reject, and you knew, sometimes you may not know up front that this isn't a good case. You might have to bring them in and sort of do the intake process.
Yeah, the classic case that I'll give you a really good example of a case that we had to reject. So a client comes into our office, and it was a very, very heavy collision, a car accident collision. It was an intersection collision. And because of the fact that it was an intersection collision, the cars were all displaced, and my client had a belief about how the accident happened, but because it was such a severe accident, they really weren't exactly sure how the accident happened. So what we did is we had them go out to their home, take the route that they would normally take. And we realized when we were going through the cross-examination with my client, our proposed cross-examination of the client and what they did, that the route that they would have taken and what they were describing really ultimately would have put fault on them in the accident. So what they saw originally as a case, and they were hurt so badly, and they started to put two and two together, they understood themselves that they ultimately were the ones that caused the accident.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible. You know, and the funny thing is, Brandon, when you talk about that, I mean, I know I've heard so many lawyers that just take anything. In other words, comes across to death and they're holding on for dear life. When you're in a position to actually go through and vet something like that, it says something about yourself and the firm that, look, you know.
My partner and I said that the practice became much better as we grew, and we can be more discriminating in the cases that we took, because then when we walk into court with somebody next to us, the other side knows already that we've been discriminating, and they're already starting ahead because they know that we've chosen the cases that we feel are going to be the most successful.
Exactly. David, tell us about some, you know, I mean, like Marla said, you know, somebody comes in, you know, and you know what perception is of a jury, you know what they're going to face, even if it's you know, if they're saying, listen, I didn't do it, and you're looking at a situation going, well, you may not have done it, but let me tell you what you're going to face. I'm sure there's been some difficult situations that you had to break to a client.
Well, and that's exactly true. I mean, basically, I'll set up all the different options and go through the pluses and the minuses of each option. But if the person says to me, oh, well, you know, I absolutely want a trial, and I'll be like, you're going to lose.
Right.
I mean, and then you're going to be going to jail for a long time.
That's right. I want to keep it real here, man. I mean, that's really what it's about. People need to know, obviously, when they walk in, what they're facing.
Right.
I mean, you see a lot of, this is kind of, the other night my wife and I were watching, this is the first time in the history of, so on Saturday night, I was, you know, we watch a show together. It's like a little ritual, and it was one of them 48-hour type shows. I'm telling you, I'm not kidding you. It was the only time we ever saw in our entire life where everybody was lying, and at the end of the show, you're going, my God, I can't even at the end of it, and the girl end up being guilty because they gave immunity to everybody else. But the point is, you must walk into some webs that are, you know, tangled, and you have to get to the bottom of them. And when sometimes you got bad news that you got to explain to your client, even if they're sitting there saying, "Look, I'm innocent."
Right. Even if they're 90% right and 10% wrong.
Here's a great example though of real vetting, and real vetting is when you have somebody who's a young guy charged with 2 burglaries. And we get assigned to the most difficult judge in terms of sentencing, where I told him right up front, you're found guilty of these 2 charges, you're going away for a really long time in a state penitentiary. And in addition to that, I got the DA to make an agreement or recommendation as to what the sentence could be, and it was very reasonable. The kid's mother said, you know, I really think he should take it. And I said, you know, you might want to really think about this. And obviously, it's always the client's decision. He said, no, I didn't do this. I want a trial. Right. I said, you understand who you're going in front of? Right. And he said, yeah, I understand that. And, you know, I still want my trial. Okay. So we had a trial, not guilty of all charges.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a heavy burden you face. David, we're going to go to break, but I want to continue this conversation after break. More with David Zealous and Brandon Swartz right after the break.